Of Pushing for Progress, a three-part panel series from March On and SEIU. I'm Andy Pringle, the Political and Strategic Campaigns Director for March On, and I'm excited to see everyone joining us tonight. This panel series is dedicated to learning from the lessons of 2020 and planning for 2022 and beyond, with 3 events focused on pivotal states. Last week, we were in Georgia, which flipped blue in a big way and gave Democrats control of the Senate. Tonight in Florida, where Democrats underperformed in expectations, and April 1st, next week in Texas, where on-the-ground infrastructure building could make the state the next one to flip. Before I hand it over to our moderator, you can join us in tweeting out highlights with the hashtag Pushing for Progress. And please put your questions for the panelists in the Q&A box. Next, I'd like to thank some people who made this panel series possible and worked around the clock to help make the wins of 2020 possible. Vanessa Rubel, March On's Executive Director, Penelope Chester, March On's Chief Operations Officer, Chris Smith, March On's National Campaigns Director, Sophia Nelson, March On's Florida State Director, and Kairu Crimes, Black Civic Engagement Lead at SEIU. We're already building our dream team for 2020, and we need you on it. That's why we're asking everyone in attendance tonight to pledge to register 5 people to vote between now and the next election. You can do that by going to wearemarchon.org/pledge. Now let's get to it. Florida went for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, but its rightward tilt in recent election cycles has been putting the state further and further out of reach of Democratic candidates. In 2020, progressives hope to make inroads at the state level and maybe even flip the state for Joe Biden. Instead, Republicans flipped 5 state house seats and Biden lost by a large margin. Now, progressives are regrouping and asking how to turn this state around before it's lost for a long time. But what makes Florida such a unique case is its makeup. About 1/4 Latino, 17% Black. Within each of these groups, there's a significant amount of diversity that affects the way people vote. But campaigns don't often understand that. On top of that, Florida passed progressive measures like medical marijuana and a $15 minimum wage, but then they elected Republicans who don't support those issues. So tonight, we want to learn more about what happened on the ground from the people who were there and what needs to happen to change right now if progressives are going to win in 2022 and beyond. To get us started, I'm honored to introduce our moderator, Millie Raphael, CEO and Chief Political Strategist for Progress for Florida, a campaign consulting firm focused on leveling the playing field for Black and Brown candidates who reflect their communities. She's also the co-founder of Bring It Home Florida and Next Steps Florida, a 501c3 and C4 that work to engage voters and train progressive activists and operatives. Please welcome Millie Raphael.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andy. And thank you to March On and SEIU for having me here tonight. And thank you to everyone tuning in for this important discussion about my home state, our home state. I'm looking forward to this evening. I've been organizing in Florida for many years, and it's become clear to me that Florida is like no other state, which means that no other state's playbook is going to work here. Andy, as you mentioned, Florida is about 1/4 Latino, but there are enormous differences within that group. Puerto Ricans, my people, Boricuas, we don't vote like Cubans, and Cubans don't vote like Colombians. And on that note, Haitians don't vote like African Americans necessarily. But as we saw in 2020, those nuances aren't always understood and respected by candidates or the party. So tonight we're going to break down the elements of electoral defeat in Florida and try to understand how we can come back from this, because we have to come back from it, and quickly. So our panel tonight, on our panel, we have some of Florida's best and most committed organizers and leaders. We'll start with Dr. Karen Green, Director of Liberty and Justice for All Community Foundation and a Vice Chair of the Florida Democratic Party. We have Alfonso Mayfield, president at Florida Public Services Union, SEIU, and also a vice chair of the Florida Democratic Party. Roxy Nelson, VP of Politics and Strategic Campaigns at 1199 SEIU, United Healthcare Workers East. Angela Cruz of New Leaders Council, Palm Beach. Sean Shaw, attorney, former state representative and founder of People Over Profits. Stacy Patel, state committee woman and former chair of the Brevard Democratic Party. And Reverend Joe Paramore, founder and chief executive presbyter of New Journey Ministries in Quincy and a member of Faith in Public Life Florida Leadership Council. First of all, thank you all for being here tonight and being our panelists. So I'd like to start off with a round robin question. I think I can speak for every person on this panel when I say that we all believe Florida can be and is at its heart blue, or we wouldn't put in the hard work year after year, day after day. Progressive issues passed, like medical marijuana and a $15 minimum wage, which are issues our Democratic-controlled Senate can't even agree on. But progressive candidates failed. So the question that I'd like each of you to answer when I say your name is, what happened? Karen, let's start with you.
Well, first, let me thank Marchand for the invitation and thank the viewers and listeners and the esteemed panel that you've put together, Dr. Reverend Carmen, good evening to you as well. I think so much has happened. Thank you for pulling this, the idea of us being here. And before I even, I'll take 30 seconds to recognize the victims of the senseless shootings that have happened across this great country. And more so, you spoke of the diversity in the state of Florida, or Asian American population that is also a part of that numeric statistic that we don't seem to recognize. My sincere support to this great group in our state of Florida. You're right, this is what used to be known as, New York used to be like the state of Florida with diversity. I really feel that the emphasis of messaging, as you spoke before, was not direct. I think there was a point, I must say that I strongly feel the intention of the former administration, former leading of the party by grassroots engagement. We missed the coordinated campaign, missed an opportunity by speaking and getting the support of the local DECs, particularly for hiring people who were already trained in these districts and in these counties. I also think that the clubs and caucuses needed to have played a better role in engagement. And there are lots of folks who've led, like you have on the grassroots, the people on this panel who in some cases were not even were not given the support they should have. I think right now what happened in Miami-Dade could have been corrected. I really think that we need to focus on messaging. We need to make sure we don't leave the Black and brown people in the state of Florida for last, thinking that we are because we're the most loyal voters. The investment needs to happen now. We don't need to just be turning into churches when it's close to the polls. I also feel that COVID, no matter how we see it, as much as we did a great part of early voting and registering voters across the state, Florida has a culture of going to the polls because this is still the Bible Belt. And people really did not get to the polls for some of those reasons. And so I really think that collectively we have an opportunity now for many of us here to start the process now. We're doing it. The fact that we have two people of faith on this call says a lot, that we're prepared now to move in this direction of full engagement and fully participating going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Karen. Alfonso, how would you answer that question? What happened?
So I think it's important when talking about 2020 to really realize that what happened in 2020 started in 2016. The day after the election, the 2016 election, the Trump campaign and the Republican Party made a decision that they were going to move heavily into the state of Florida because they realized that they narrowly won. They realized the areas where they were weak, and they said, look, if we lose Florida, we have no path in 2020. They moved, the president at the time moved, he moved his campaign manager, they moved significant infrastructure, and then other entities like Americans for Prosperity, other parts of the Koch brothers network, and other right-leaning entities also moved into the state, heavily started in 16. And what they decided to do is say, okay, look, we're going to test out what we're going to do everywhere else in Florida, and we're going to start early. And if you look at the gubernatorial race in 18, the methods that were designed and were used were a dress rehearsal of what they were going to do here in 20. So that's one part of it. The part of it that the left and that Democrats should own is that the times where in even number years or in presidential years, we can expect the presidential candidate to come in and run this big campaign and that's going to lift off, those times are over with. We have to have the infrastructure in the state with our party, a strong centralized party that can recruit candidates, raise money, drive narrative, do civic engagement throughout the year, and also have a good coexisting relationships with IE partners and other partners who are on the ground, who are doing civic engagement work and community building year round. And so if you look at that with the fact that we had an unprecedented pandemic and we were out of the field for essentially 6 to 8 months and still only lost by 3 points. So what does that mean? It means that after being outspent 7-1, after having the most well-funded Republican Party and other interests to the right in the state operate, they never came out of the field and ran one of the robust, most pernicious disinformation campaigns in the history of this country. We still only lost by 3 points and lost a bunch of other seats by shenanigans and other foolishness all up and down the ballot. What does that mean? It means this: Florida has to be a national priority. Florida goes off the table for the right, it's off the table. They will be in the wilderness for a generation. They know that. We seem to not know that. And we make national decisions where we hopscotch funding and investment in Florida in years and off years like this is 30 years ago. We can't do that. And what Dr. Green said is absolutely correct. We can also go to communities of color, and I would say white communities as well, and not talk to them for a whole year or 2 years or 3 years in any meaningful way, or have any type of direct connection to say how the party and how our movement is a vehicle to be able to win, not connect with them and then turn around and say, oh, we wonder why they didn't vote for us. That's because they have done a very good job of saying, we believe what you believe, but we don't. We're going to do something different, but we're going to say something, and they get flim-flam, right? But that's our fault. We need a strong centralized party. We need strong partners, and we need to be in the field every day, and we need to define what it means to be a Democrat and be on the left in Florida. Here's the thing. Florida is the South. It is not the East. It is not the West. It is the South. It is a Southern Democratic Party. And we have to treat it and understand that that means you are climbing uphill and have everything that we need. But that means that every other state, the DNC, the White House, whoever, has to say, we're going to figure out how we invest in Florida year round, year after year, and create a diverse party that is reflective of who the party actually is. Because if we don't, we're losing the narrative battle. And we won't win for a generation if we don't turn it around.
I hear it. You know, Roxy, Alfonso brings up 2016. We worked field together on that Gillum campaign. So tell us, from your perspective, what's happened?
Thank you, Millie. What an amazing experience 18 was, getting to be on the coordinated side. This year I was on the independent side. And I think Dr. Green and Alfonso, they summed up much of the reality that we're facing. And I think as we go on and others get a chance to talk, I think all the things will bubble up. And there's some really core data points that we saw from the independent work that we did that we think are very critical to why what happened in Florida happened. But I think what I want to reflect on to start is connecting sort of the dots from what Dr. Green said and what Alfonso said. I saw that Dr. Green put in the chat the concept of continuity. And I think there's a way inside of 1199, when we educate our political organizers and coordinators about change and power, So we have a slide that shows change happening as sort of a lightning strike. And then another one as change happening as like a light switch, calling folks to understand that power and change and the type of movement change that we want to make can be something that's disruptive and explosive. But oftentimes it's something that's controlled, right? Like a light switch. It's the same energy, but we are moving through it differently. And I think sometimes when we do this work, we always think about like the Arab Spring, right? Like we think about those revolutionary moments. But the truth is that I believe, and what I think history bears out, is that change is about the slow build that we do to create the conditions that make it possible for those disruptions to happen. And at my core, I think a lot of people, what I've been hearing, this comparison of like, what happened in Florida and why wasn't it Georgia? And all these comparisons we're hearing nationally. And what I want to say really loudly to everyone is that there are 3 core things that I think are part of the soup that make up and create the conditions to make that disruptive change in the moment, make a state ready for that moment. For me, it's having the ecosystem that Alfonso just described, be prepared and ready to move around one sort of strategic purpose and strategy, moving in one direction. Having that same ecosystem be organized and focused around their treasure about resources and money, working towards that direction. And then having that ecosystem organizing all its people to move in that direction. And the truth about what I see in Florida is that on those counts of organized people, money, and strategy, we are about 40% of the way there, right? We are about 40% of the way there. So the question for me, the answer to the question is, what went wrong as Florida is exactly that. We're only 40% of the way there. But it's also what went right in Florida, right? That the 40% that we're doing that is leading us in that direction isn't for us to peel back. It is how do we do that smarter, more, all the things we're gonna dialogue about on this call, about making it sharper, more connected, more aligned, more strategic, more sensitive to culture. All those things that will come up is what I believe gets us the rest of the 60% of the way there. And so I look forward to the rest of the conversation to hear the specific ways that we all want to work together to create that reality.
Wonderful. So Angela, I'm a grassrooter, and I suspect you are as well, working to create some of the leaders of the future. Tell us a little bit about your perspective on what you think happened.
Perfect. Thank you so much for putting this together. This is really a complicated question, and there's no single answer for it, to be honest. With that being said, we can look at the facts from the past decade and use those facts to form a basis for our assumptions, right? Back in 2012, when Obama was reelected, according to the Florida Division of Elections, Florida Democrats enjoyed a registration advantage of about 557,000 voters. Since then, every single year, the Republican Party has shrunk that margin by about 100,000 registrations per election cycle. As of March 23rd this year, the Democratic advantage is down to about 111,000 voters, right? So at this pace, the Republican Party could completely take our advantage by election day of 2022. And these are really scary statistics. It really seems that voters, specifically minority voters, have been taken for granted in the past. The narrative that time is on our side and that as America grows more diverse, the Democratic Party will continue to rise has been proven false. So we really need to improve our messaging and to show that we really understand our communities. So I think that focused targeting and community organizing really has to change to have a voice for our different communities and not assume that everybody will vote the same.
Awesome. Representative Shaw, you would come at this a little bit differently, having been an elected. So your perspective is as important. Can you tell us from that perspective what you in this election?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Unfortunately, I'm tired of getting invited to these because we have these all the time. I've been on at least 4 of these over the years because we keep being in the same spot. And so I'll say that first. And I agreed with a lot of what Alfonso said, but I'm going to ask a rhetorical question. Nationally, what has Florida shown to national funders that would engender any sort of confidence that we know what we're doing and that you should invest in us in a major way? Nothing. Over the last 10 years, we have shown nothing much, where you could go nationally and say, you know what, y'all to double down in Florida. We're important. Check us out. We just haven't. And we need to do better, and we are doing better, and we're working at it. And I agree a strong centralized party is important to that, and hopefully we're in that direction. But from my vantage point, I think messaging is really where we're getting beaten up. We're getting beaten up in infrastructure and ecosystem and all that. But again, in 2018 specifically, Amendment 4, the Felon Restoration Amendment, passed by 60+%. Ron DeSantis came out against it. He won the governor's race. Ashley Moody came out against it. She won the attorney general's race. The CFO was not for it. That was a Republican. He won the CFO's race. That tells you a lot of things, but I think what it also tells you is that the Democratic Party's brand in Florida is diminished. And so we need to figure out what it means to be a Florida Democrat. And that's not what a California Democrat is. That's not what a Massachusetts Democrat is. That's not what a Georgia Democrat is. What does it mean to be a Florida Democrat? How's that going to make your life better? If you give us the keys to the kingdom, what does that mean for you, voter? And I don't think we have a direct answer to that. And I think we're working on that and we need to get there. But I think our messaging, the socialism thing, obviously, but our legislative candidates got beat up and down the ballot for this defund the police thing. And if you ask any of them, not one of them supports, quote, defunding the police, unquote, but that doesn't matter. When it's thrust upon you and there's 10 mail pieces about it, it's a problem in your district. And so and you don't have any kind of messaging to push back on it as to what you are, what it means to be a Florida Democrat. So I really believe this messaging piece is super important. We got to figure that out because I don't think anything else, any of the other stuff matters if we can't communicate to the voters why they ought to allow us the honor to lead the state.
So, Stacey, would you agree with Sean that it's really a messaging issue and that Florida Democrats have not found their identity? Would you agree that's part of what happened? What's your perspective on this?
I absolutely agree that that's a large part of the issue. I think articulating our values clearly and passionately has not been a strong point for the Florida Democrats. So I absolutely think that's part of the problem, but I don't think that it's all of it. I also think strategically we have fallen down. I think, in Brevard, we were able to improve our margins by about 4 points. In the rest of the state, the average, Trump improved his margins in the opposite direction. And I think there were some key differences between what we decided to do here and what was done in the rest of the state. And I think part of that is a sustained focus on goals and objectives that are clear for every organizer in the state of Florida. The fact that our vote by mail, our voter registration has fallen off. All of these things are critical. And I'll be honest, as a chair in the Democratic Party for the past 4 years in the state of Florida, I didn't know what the goals were. Occasionally some would come up, no one was measuring them. There was no clear communication about whether we were making progress or not. The goals changed all the time. And I think honestly, if we don't do those basic things, and that's, I do think in Brevard, every month we had a goal. We knew for 4 years we were working on mail ballot registration. It wasn't just when COVID arrived. Rose, we did not stop doing belly-to-belly communication here in advance of the election, despite the rest of the state. We did it safely. We still went to the doors. And I think that lives, I think, you know, the determination that we made here was that lives matter across the state of Florida, and we could do so safely. So we put on our masks, we geared up, and we went to the doors because those elections mattered to the lives of Floridians. So honestly, though, I think it starts with a statewide playbook, and I do believe that has to be unique to Florida. But I just don't think we made a sustained effort to focus on our objectives. And I think that was in every community. And I think really just doing that, deciding what our goals are and focusing on them together is going to pull us a long way. So I think that's simplistic, but honestly, I think it really is. That's what it is.
So listening to the panelists, it sounds like, you know, it's been a perfect storm of lack of structure, lack of, you know, a year-round, lack of messaging, lack of Paramore. What do you think about this perfect storm?
Well, you know, I'd like to pick up on something that Dr. Green shared, and that is, you know, Florida has its own uniqueness when it comes to politics. And one of the challenges I think that we face is that we consistently neglect our DECs, our Democratic clubs, specifically in rural and marginalized communities across this state. You know, the last time I checked, there was more to Florida than just major metropolitan areas. And when we consistently neglect those areas, we all know what happens. Folks are going to begin to fall. And with the African-American community, things that we've seen across North Florida is that they're just not voting. What we have seen with the Latino community is they're voting, but they're changing parties and voting. And that is a huge problem and challenge that we face. And going back to the playbook issue, I have seen over the past 5-6 cycles and have questioned it every cycle. Why do we bring in folks from out of state that has never lived here, never experienced life in Florida, and think they are the beginning and the end all when it comes to the Florida elections? That's a huge challenge for me. And I wanted to address something, you know, we talk about messaging and we talk about some of the dysfunction, but there's one word that has not been thrown out, and I'm going to throw it out there, and that is leadership. And that is, I think, something that is an elephant in this room, is that we're afraid to talk about the leadership of the party when that leadership is responsible for setting direction and providing to Stacey and Brevard County directions for the DEC and for DECs across the state. And when that is non-existent, when there's no direction and there's no strategy, how can we be successful?
These are all excellent points. All excellent points. I want to remind everyone at home, if you have questions for the panelists, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'd like to include those as well. I want to change it up a little bit. Dr. Green and Alfonso, this question is for you. In 2020, Florida gave us a perfect case study for what we've always said: Americans support issues that are often called progressive. They want a higher minimum wage. They want things like universal health care. They want to ease the burden of college tuition. They want to make home ownership more affordable. In your opinion, can you tell us about what you saw on the ground when you talked to voters about these issues versus the candidates who supported them? Karen?
Well, first, let me just say that every Democrat, I believe, is a progressive, because because we believe in progressive values. Anything that is going to move us forward is progression. To that point, you know, we believe, I personally saw where, you know, it was Representative Sean Shaw just said that you know, there were in fact issues that were just neglected. In 2020 and in 2008 and in 2012, when the most vigilant, historic campaign of President Barack Obama, Organized for America, Organized for Action, the way of engagement was really by initiatives. Issues like pathway to citizenship with immigration, the LGBTQ rights, senior citizen rights, the Affordable Care Act, a way to engage our community, just as you mentioned. We need to find a way, and candidates needed to do that, not just to be enthusiastic, but to be passionate about the areas that related to their demographic communities. Not everything that matters in a Central and North Florida is the same. So we can't even have a blanket of initiatives. We necessarily have to look at each community and see what their engagement necessities are. Here in Central Florida, we have one of the largest employers at Disney. And there were unions. That is another part. That are unions are the strongest part. Unite Here was on the ground fighting for these employees to get that minimum wage issues. We have housing crises and home issues. So it is also going to take the awareness of candidates in their demographic groups, in their geographic locations across the 67 counties, what is imperative to your district? Is it employment? Is it education? Is it the protection of gun rights? It is, in fact, is it because we're looking at a community that, as Sean said, are returning residents? Are we creating employment for reentry of our citizens? Are we finding housing to facilitate these people moving in? So it really is going to come down to a big part of this, as you mentioned. Candidate recruitment should be not just because you want to run, even though a democratic process, everyone has an opportunity for democracy, but we need to take the time to find candidates who are going to energize and also be able to deliver the message of our party. We might never meet another Barack Obama. We can no way identify 2012 and 2008 with the same enthusiasm of candidates. But we have an opportunity to now look at candidates who have either ran before or are seasoned enough to recognize what it is these communities need. And I strongly suggest you touched on areas of housing. For example, Broward County, one of the most loyal Democratic districts that has one of the most diverse groups of Black people, of immigrants, Caribbean, Haitian, Caribbean including Haitians, Latinas, you name it. It is a melting pot of Democratic people. Central Florida, one of our brothers just talked about it, that the literacy of immigrants voting, you're Puerto Rican, Millie, your descent, it's a different voting culture. So I believe that we now have a task of two things. One, identifying the initiatives, the issues that are directed at each county, the electorate, the voters in our districts, get familiar with the cultural diversity and sensitivities, and look to see what it is those districts need that represent the democratic values. And that is how we're going to make change in the state of Florida. It is doable. We did it before, we can do it again. We need to be speaking to our Puerto Ricans that Puerto Rico has 3 different voting political parties. And the interesting thing is that who are Democrats in Puerto Rico do not identify as Democrats here. So we have a strong part of that we need to get to. And you're right, Central Florida and in other areas across the state, our issues, our initiatives, it needs to be a focal point. And we need to learn from those lessons we did before.
You're absolutely right. And I'm glad you brought up demographics. Puerto Ricans in South Florida, we're very different from Puerto Ricans in Central Florida. So it's not just demography. Alfonso, how would you have a different answer to this question than Dr. Green?
I don't know that I have a different answer, but I guess I would approach the problem a little bit differently. And it kind of speaks to what Representative Shaw and Stacy and others said earlier. I think we have to be very clear in what we're saying. We're all saying partly things that are true, right? We're all speaking to core parts of the problem. The core issue to me is that the reason why something like Amendment 4 or Amendment 2 can pass and we lose as Democrats is because the the electorate do not see the Democratic Party as speaking to those values and as being a vehicle to a better life. And so if we talk about how we lost in 20, we didn't just lose ground in white communities. We lost them across the Latinx spectrum. We lost them with Black women, with Black men, with Afro-Caribbean. We lost across the board. And so if there's that level of erosion, it means that there was a disconnect between the brand of what the party was, what it stands for, and who it's supposed to work for and speak to, right? And I also think that it's important to also talk about that a lot of our core constituencies, it works in the best interest of our opposition if they suppress the vote, that they don't vote. So there's a constant disinformation campaign of saying, why should you not vote? Why should you not vote, right? So to go back to what we've been talking about the whole time, leadership is important. Speaking narratively is important about what we stand for, right? And also, if you have a candidate, if we are a big tent party, and we talk about that, right, a lot, but there are a lot of ramifications of what that means. It means that we're never all going to be on completely the same page and speak to the same thing. But the core message to who we are as a Democrat, those are things that we corely believe, but we don't define them in the same way. We don't use symbolism in the same way, right? And we also, when we are at our best, we knock doors, we scale field, we organize, and we speak the common purpose and mission. We didn't do that. And I would also say this too, because I thought about this and forgot it. You made me remember, looking at Stacey. What happened in 20 was not about just 20. It was something that has happened over the course of the last 20 years, right? So to speak to what Representative Shaw said too, nationally, when we say, like, what have we said nationally to say why you should invest in Florida, we've built one of the best extensive, i.e. independent expenditure operations in the country. Other states come down and look at it. But that happened at the same time that the centralized structure of the party was going in the opposite direction. These things have to work in tandem, right? And if we aren't doing that in the real way, we're not going to catch up and we're not going to win. And we should assume that we're operating from a place of being behind. But I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say it every time I get a chance to speak. Florida has to be a national priority. It can't. We can't have national thought leaders talk about the context of the election just about one cycle. There was a bunch of punditry to say, let's just ignore Florida. We got to rebuild a blue wall. That has ramifications, and the ramifications are you lose in 2020. And when redistricting happens, you have more electoral votes in Florida, and now you have to go back and rebuild the infrastructure you need to win in 24. We have to keep our eye on the ball and say, year after year, what is the infrastructure we're building in the communities that we care about? How are we creating and developing core competent campaign staff who can actually do campaign work and organizing work in the communities that we're talking about? And how are we recruiting candidates that actually reflect who the Democratic Party is? You want to change that initial problem of people not seeing the party as the vehicle to improve their lives. You do that, and that happens automatically, right? But we haven't done that. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say, we can't. If the primary reason we're picking somebody to run for office because they can self-fund their campaign and they're not completely aligned and they don't speak to the core vision, we're probably not going to win, even if some of them are great people. Right? We have to do a better job across the board.
So Dr. Green and Alfonso bring up, the intersection of organizing and demographics and knowing your communities. Angela, as a Latina, I have to tell you, there were times when there were not Colombians knocking on Colombian doors or Boricuas knocking on Puerto Rican doors, and we did have folks that parachuted in that didn't know these communities. What were you seeing on the ground?
That's a great question. Well, in the last cycle, because of COVID-19, it really forced our campaigns to remain indoors for the most part. And this change to digital organizing came at the cost of building relationships with voters through face-to-face interactions. Something that I think we can do better with our digital and in-person organizing is to try to remain mindful of the communities and the cultures that we're organizing in. I think a focus on relational organizing would help develop a more efficient and effective, culturally competent field initiative This way, people would be better, they can organize within their own personal networks and communities, and it would make a stronger impact. Another important point I would like to make, as a Hispanic person myself, I think we should differentiate the Cuban, the Venezuelan community from other Hispanic communities, keeping in mind that Cuba and Venezuela come from very oppressive governments, and they have a really negative connotation of the word socialism. We have to be sensitive to that and understand that if we want to connect with those communities. We should really try to change this by specifically targeting and educating the Cuban and Venezuelan communities, that we're not looking to foster government oppression, but rather we want to help provide aid to communities that need it the most.
That's an excellent point. I would also like to point out that the word progresista in Spanish is a no-no. It's like saying we're dictators or we're socialist. So being able to speak the language by translating it appropriate is really very critical. So I appreciate those points, Angela. They're very, very important. I want to switch it again. Roxy, this question is for you. Labor is a powerful force in Florida. I'd like you to share with us, please, any lessons that you learned about investing our resources in Florida more efficiently. What worked? What didn't work?
Thank you, Millie. I'm glad that Alfonso responded, but just having listened to the dialogue, which is super helpful and super rich, I do want to say I want to make sure we're talking about the full ecosystem of organizing and electoral capacity that exists in the state. There's a hard side, there's a soft side, right? And so I want to make it clear, it is loud and clear, and I think we all understand that on the coordinated aspect, the party anchored aspect of our work, I think Sean said we need to have a strong, right, a party infrastructure that's anchored by leadership to raise the money that we need, to run the communication strategies that help us win, that is values-based that you all are all talking about, and that runs the type of field strategy with goals and expectations and accountability that Stacey's talking to us about. But I want to say that there's also an independent side of the wall that I reject that we did not do that type of work this cycle, because I saw it being executed and the scale that the teams were able to reach was magnificent. And looking at our numbers and seeing the work that was done in our universe, seeing that the doors that we knocked or the people that we texted in our universe, the low propensity voters, 10 times more likely to vote than other people. So we do have the numbers to show that the work was done. And I want to make sure that we understand that. I also think Alfonso's point about, as we have to be honest about where we struggle, what we're not doing right, the 60% we still need to get to. But as leaders of the state, the biggest thing that we can do, I said it in the beginning, a strategy that we're all buying into and driving and pushing forward on, right? Organizing our resources towards that strategy and then getting aligned in our ecosystem. If we do not do that, and part of that is how we talk about what we're doing nationally, I reject the idea that we haven't won anything to show and say, invest in us in this state. I reject that, right? We have Daniela Levine Cava's race is an example. Mira Castor is an example. The minimum wage, the rights restoration. There are wins and victories in the state in a climate that is a really difficult climate to organize in, where we have no power. And so I hear it that we need to hold ourselves accountable. I hear it that we need to do better, but we need to be also honest about the things that we are doing right and that we need to improve on. Your question about labor organizing and what I saw that I think we can be proud of. I think one thing, and it's coming up, right? Folks are saying it. Like, I think the biggest thing is, like, we got out of the field, y'all. Like, in March, 2020, we got out of the field and we organized Black and brown people, and we could see it in the numbers when we started to talk to them at the end, right? Like they turned out, right? And so, you know, I really think that decision to get out of the field impacted us in a way that, you know, we paid, you know, dearly for it. Both in turnout, our ability to do persuasion, and for voter registration, right? Like we got our ass kicked. That's real. And I think we've known that our communities need to be touched, and the relationship that Angela's talking about, that's real. And we did not do it. So yes, we lost massively on that ground. I think the thing that's coming up around the constituency organizing, and our values-based messaging, and doing that not just to mobilize people or to motivate people, but to persuade the very communities that we're seeing that, you know, Black and Latino voters between the age of 25 and 35, they're dropping off. The same thing we were seeing with a cycle ago with pure Latino voters. We're seeing that migrate to other constituencies as well. That's alarming. Right? So there's work that we need to do there to make sure that we're correcting, and we're messaging, and we're talking, and we're being authentic in our conversations with our communities. The fact that the resources, right? Alfonso talked about it. They started spending here in 2018, and they parked and they didn't leave. And so if you want us to win a state like Florida, and you want to invest in us in September and October, then you get what you get. Like, at the end of the day, like if you want us to win, then invest in us early so we can be in our communities doing the culturally competent things we know how to do, right? And do that all the way through. So to me, that's core. And then the two other things is that when we engage, there's this myth that if you engage low propensity voters, they won't vote. It's not true. The numbers don't bear that out. When you engage low propensity voters, you give them a touch, you give them a text, you go out and you talk to them, you're in their communities, they vote. And the numbers bear that out. And so I just think there are lots of lessons to learn from 2020, that how we can do organizing smarter, but it comes down to the willingness to invest. Again, Georgia didn't just happen, did have a charismatic leader, but there was an organized strategy, the ecosystem they have, having an alliance, having a strong party, having an independent apparatus working together legally to move into one direction, that's what wins. That alignment is what wins. And so I just encourage us to this conversation and other conversations like it, where we're talking across difference and figuring out what the challenges are, and then putting, like Stacey said, it is not rocket science. It is get back to basics. The party needs to raise money, it needs to do communications, and it needs to execute a 67 county field plan, period, right? Go do that, learn how to do it well, and then talk to me about other things. On the independent side of the wall, for us, we need to make sure we're getting resources early enough so that the folks in the community that live and breathe in our communities can do the work we know how to do. And if we can make that happen in the state, I think we can win, and we just have to keep chipping away. That's how I see it, Millie.
So I love your passion, Roxy. I always have. And you know me, I'm incredibly, incredibly passionate as well. And I come from the other side. I come from the grassroots side. You know, I am that woman that at, 11 o'clock at night was at her kitchen table writing postcards or putting up signs or, part of Rise Up and Women's March and all of that other stuff that's organic. Stacey, this question is for you. How can grassroots, folks like me that just did it organically, support, help, collaborate more effectively with grass tops, particularly when we're talking about we need to invest early and we don't have those resources right now?
So, I mean, that's the beautiful thing about the roots, right? There's a lot of resources that aren't needed. We had 1,100 people that we got through minivan that canvassed in Brevard County alone during the last cycle. So there's two things that need to happen. One is there does need to be a playbook. There does need to be, these are the goals we're trying to accomplish: voter registration, vote by mail, reaching out, recruiting candidates. That needs to be incredibly and impeccably clear, both from the IE perspective and from the party, so that grassroots do know where to engage, so that the roots do know that this is where you can be the most impactful. Because I see it all the time. Great people, passionate people in the roots, they're, frankly, I see too often spending their times on things that could be more impactful, frankly. And I love and I embrace grassroots energy. I'm grassroots. I'm all about engendering that energy. So I just think we need to figure out how can we most impactfully spend the time of our roots volunteers, because we want to make sure that they feel a sense of fulfillment, and that effort really does pay off for the state of Florida. So I think engaging with the party, frankly, engaging and forcing the party to articulate, these are the things that are important. If we don't do these things, but unfortunately, if it's just roots operating independently without any clear cohesive strategy, it's really hard to create overall victory. So I would just say you should be pressuring the party. You should be pressuring us and joining the party. That's the other thing. I'm a volunteer. Everyone in the party is a volunteer. If it's not doing the job effectively, go in, take it over, and make sure it does the job. That's what I did. I mean, frankly, I think that that's a lot of it too, is building power for the roots. So getting involved, pushing on the party for clear strategy, and focusing your work where it matters the most. Unfortunately, in Florida, we don't have a lot of legislative power. So maybe spend less time on legislative persuasion and more time on voter registration, so that we can win elections and build the legislative power we need to actually, but I see a lot of people focus on legislative persuasion, which is important. We have to get our values articulated, but I also don't want us to spend all our time pressing for a minority to win victories that they can't win in the House and Senate right now in Florida. Let's spend that time and energy winning victories to give them the power they need to do the work. So
I love it. There are so many opportunities for grassroots and grass tops and unions and electeds and community leaders to all work together. And you're right, this playbook is absolutely needed. And the panelists have talked a lot about messaging as well. Reverend Paramore, if you would, the faith community is very, very important in the state of Florida. Can you talk to us about the values-based message that candidates were trying to get out there and deliver? So what is the wrong way to do that kind of messaging with faith-based communities, and what's the right way to do it? You're on mute. You're on mute, Reverend.
I'm like Sean now. You would think after a year and a half we'd have this down. It depends on the community of faith that we're working in, because even in our messaging, we have to respect the diversity that exists in our faith communities. And it's not a one brush paints everyone. And I think Dr. Green can agree with that. And so, we have to respect their traditions, and we have to be able to develop messaging that can encompass their traditions that's specific to them, yet express the values and beliefs of our party. So it's a very delicate balance. But I think the key to messaging overall is, oftentimes we think we have to have a dissertation as a response to some of the Republicans and their shenanigans, when oftentimes if we simplify that message, and you know, Republicans hate democracy, you know, they hit us with defund the police, 3 or 4 words, and yet we create this dissertation trying to explain why we don't believe in defunding the police. But specific to the faith message, and this is one that is often controversial, and that is a woman's right to choose. I mean, it is between her and her doctor. And, you know, oftentimes the way we have messaged that in the past with the faith community, you know, we get flagged and tagged as anti-right to life, you know, as abortionist. And so, you know, we can flip that script even within the faith communities that struggle with that. And if we flip that script and we start talking about, you know, women's health care, as opposed to, you know, right to life or pro-life or a woman's right to choose, it's about their health and their health care. And we have seen, and we saw in this last cycle, working with a lot of the Latino evangelicals, that one of their biggest challenges was abortion. And so when we flip that script with a lot of the Latino evangelicals in this last cycle, we begin to see the paradigm shift when we quit using certain language. And so I think that's how we deal with the faith community, is we have to be sensitive to their traditions. We have to respect those traditions and find that balance of how we can convey who we are as a people and a party that brings them in and includes them rather than excludes them. Because, you know, we consider ourselves the party of inclusion. However, a lot of the messaging out there is exclusionary, and that we have to work on, and we have to formulate a way to respond. And, you know, responding with, you know, white papers and dissertations is not the way to do it. So that's what I would say. You know, there's, and again, I just want to emphasize that we can't paint all faith communities with a single brushstroke because of the diversity within that community. And I think we have to be mindful of that.
So another theme here is that Florida can't be a one paintbrush state, that we need to look at messaging in terms of diversity across ethnicities, geographies, and faiths. So this question is for you, Representative Shaw. So one of the things that Reverend Paramore said earlier on is that we've had this tendency to parachute people in to work on our campaigns, whether it's a statewide, a coordinated, a national, sidelining some of the folks, grassrooters, that really know their communities. So, Rep, at what point do we own this work? And what does that look like?
That's a good question. I think it's a huge problem. You know, when people ask where is the Stacey Abrams in Florida? Well, there's lots of them. They just have not been uplifted and given resources and allowed to thrive and given backup. And so what happened, you know, when I ran for the House in 2016, I won my primary and I was looking to get involved in the Hillary Clinton campaign, and someone met me at a park that I'd never met before, that I didn't know, that was from Illinois, and handed me a packet and said, knock on doors for Hillary Clinton. And that was the Hillary Clinton outreach in the Black community in Tampa. That's a problem, right? So that is, I think, what Reverend Paramore is talking about. We need to, people that know the communities need to be empowered to do that, but that requires an ecosystem and infrastructure. And that is why these things have to last election cycles. They can't just pop up a tent, here's the election, and the tent goes away. It requires sustained outreach and sustained ecosystem, so those things are there, but they're tremendously important, and you have to meet people where they are. And this kind of up and down, that roller coaster we're on, we got to do better than we're doing. We see what it leads to. It leads to where we're at now and why we're doing this call.
So, Dr. Green, you talked a little bit about the diversity in the Black community, and we're all talking about this ecosystem and doing a better job. Has anyone done a better job? In your opinion, who did a good job in the last cycle?
I'm happy you reached out to me on that point, because I was about to raise my hand. In the last, I actually had the opportunity of serving as the diversity chair. This committee was once known as the Affirmative Action Committee. And one of the roles we had was to make sure that the staffing of the party was demographically reflective of the state. The grassroots ground team that was hired before the coordinated campaign came in, these people were on the ground for about a year. Many of them were across the small counties, across the different counties. They actually became almost a part of the community. And so I think just to respond to something Roxy said earlier, the coordinated campaign, as you all know, I really think we need to find another name for coordination, where it really should be where we are inclusive of the ground people that are already here. And the important part of that was one of the challenges we faced was the local DECs, having worked with these grassroots people on the ground, they never had an opportunity to make recommendations to the coordinated campaign for these people who were already seasoned in the communities and had gotten to know and build relationships, as Angela said, with folks on the ground. The diversity effect of this is, I think we should, something else was said by Sean, as well as Sophie elaborated, that, it is known on the normal circumstances, the 29 electoral votes out of Florida, there was always a note from nationally that to become president, you had to secure those 29 electoral votes. This time, historically, we didn't do it, but yet we won. And so this is the reason why nationally, people look at Florida like, we don't need to put the money there. We could invest in Georgia, Texas, even California. People were looking at different states to invest for those reasons. The interesting thing is that we have an opportunity. As the Reverend said, we have to find a way to have a year-round grassroots engagement reflective of our state. And at the same time, when the coordinated campaign comes in, the first point of contact for continuation, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to find a way, here's the unique thing. Unlike any other state, Florida now has an opportunity to even speak to the DNC, to speak to the Southern Battleground State Directors, that what we did before, here's what we think needs to happen next. We have to have a synchronized, ongoing, year-round relationship building, continuation, mentorship. This is a volunteer basis, as was said earlier. And everybody who is involved here is progressively passionate because we're Democrats, because we believe this is the way that we could build sovereignty. Let me just say this, because somebody said about the elephant in the room. The biggest thing about our Democratic Party is we need to be unified. We need unity. The first thing we need to do to conquer anything is that we don't need to we can have ideas and ideologies like every family, but we have to come together. Most people who voted for Donald Trump didn't like the guy, but the Republican Party continues to support. Look at the blockbusters we have every time. They refuse to leave their base. I strongly recommend that regardless of, because everybody has their strengths, the progressive part of our party has been the strongest in engagement, the strongest in recruitment, because their passion is about getting to the point that matters. I believe what we need to do now is that we need to use the strength of unity. There's nowhere we're going to win Florida unless we do it collectively. No way. We need to all come together and get this thing done. This is where the diversity comes in. Diversity by inclusion, diversity by ideas, ideologies, innovation, race, culture, and ethnicity. This is how we're going to do it.
I love that, Dr. Green. I really do. It really sums up how I feel, and I'm sure many of the panelists here feel. And so I want to kind of open this question up to everyone, but I wanted to start with you, Alfonso. You know, we talk about respecting the diversity of our, we also talk about it sometimes in silos. Is there an opportunity for intersectionality between our Black and Brown communities while respecting them, but understanding that they can work collaboratively and in union?
Of course there is. I think that there are examples of that happening. I think, but let me speak to this too, because this came up earlier. So like when the discussion came up, like, you know, we got hung with the defund the police thing or this and that. So let's talk about that and let's unpack that, because it's not that's not a narrative issue. There was an issue that is a historic issue about Black people and other people of color and other disadvantaged people being killed by police. Black people and other people of color in disproportionate rates. There's a national movement around it, and they coined the phrase defund the police. Now, we can dismiss that and say, okay, well, we don't want to, we feel hamstrung like it's a millstone around my neck, but then you're still coming around to those same communities and say, you need to vote for us. But okay, well, how are you fixing this other issue? And so at the core, I think that we have to understand, to go to the last question that you said, the people who are doing good work about engaging communities of color and even doing intersectional work in communities of color are the groups that have been doing it all the time and that are in those communities year in and year out, right? For its function corely, the party has historically been focused with how do I turn you out to vote around this issue, around these candidates. What I'm saying is that for our party to be who it truly is and to be successful, we have to be something different, where we have to engage in these communities year round. We have to be seen as a vehicle to better the lives of the communities and speak and deal with these issues. And that means we're going to be at the cross section of some issues that are going to be divisive. I don't necessarily have an answer for how we specifically deal with those things, but what we try to do sometimes is either triangulate or avoid dealing with them. And guess what? It doesn't work. We get hit with it anyway. We get called wishy-washy. People will be like, why am I voting for? Why am I going to vote? It's not going to, why? It don't matter. You don't care about me, whatever. And that's not going to work. We have to be fundamentally different. And I think we have to view ourselves standing hand in hand with the partners who are already doing this work every day, with the communities who are already doing this work. You know, what's instructive to me, Eric Bracken, great scholar, Eric Bracken, does this history of Americans for Prosperity and Libre, and they talk about how they've basically been in these communities, doing stuff in these communities without an official ask for over a decade. They weren't doing that out of the kindness of their own heart. They were doing it in a way to set up an infrastructural network to turn around and create what happened in 20 in Florida. So to speak to what Roxy said too, so then if you come in September of the election year and say, okay, now here's the money for the election, we're already 9 years behind. We're already 2 years behind. We have to re-envision how we are saying and what we're building, and not just make it about the election. An election is a moment in time, is an outcome of all the work that comes up to that point. If we only view the election as what we did in the 3 or 4 months in preceding that, we're going to continue to lose. And we have to engage and embrace a different vision for how we build power for people in the communities that we're in, and turn that out and turn out the vote that way.
So it's interesting that you brought up the Black Lives Matter and the defund the police. You know, as a grassroots activist, I was part of those protests and, you know, brought many volunteers that were Hispanic to that. And I found that as the messaging turned to defund the police, my Hispanic volunteers dropped off. So it is part messaging. It is part, how do we find that intersectionality of what Black and Brown community leaders and constituents core around. Does anyone have other examples of how we can come together or what might set us apart? Thoughts?
I would just add a couple of things. One is that we often view messaging as communicating, right? As speaking. And we need to do a lot more listening. That is 90% of communication. And I think I just echo what Alfonso said, this defund the police issue. I think if we were listening to the pain in this community, that we would figure out a way around the messaging. And it feels like a lack of courage, like a lack of strength for us to back down from an issue that is so critical to these communities. So I think we have to listen, and we have to be willing to engage in those conversations and to really participate, and not to try to find a way around painful places, but to really meet people where they're at. Sometimes I think we try to be politically expedient, and I'm not going to curse, but it's BS, right? We have to actually have these conversations. So I think listening is 90% of messaging, and I don't think we do enough of it. And the other thing I think is we go to people and we ask for their support, and we don't look for ways to support these communities. We need to flip both of these things. Our messaging needs to be about listening, and instead of going to people and asking for support, we need to be figuring out how we can support these communities, how we can uplift them, how we can pursue the issues that matter to them. And I think that this has been something that we've really tried to do in Brevard is, who are the leaders? Who are your candidates? What are the issues that are important, and how can we support those? And I think we just need to do that, across the spectrum more effectively if we want to create community around issues that should matter to all of us.
I want to hop in, Stacey. You inspired me. I think what I would add to what Alfonso and Stacey said is this idea of values. So Angela spoke about relational organizing, and relational organizing is exactly that. It's engaging with people where they are and being willing to have the conversation, which is 90% listening. So I think that is so critical, right? That the long-term investment, the being there early and being from the community or being able to get rooted in community is core to the ability to have the tough conversation. It's something that we see in the union all the time. Our union's 30% of members are Republicans, right? And we have to have those hard conversations because that is the way to get to, coordination, collaboration, cooperation, right? And so if we want to do that as a left movement, Democratic Party, whatever you want to say, we can't skirt that. So that's one thing. But then the other thing is the race class narrative teaches us, right, that brilliant research that you cannot, the right has these conversations head on, and we're talking around it. You have to call it out, Black, white, brown, all people, right? You have to call out the distinctions because we look crazy not naming the thing that everybody else can see. It's like the emperor has no clothes. And so I think there's a piece about values that's really critical that we don't do well. And I count myself in that because even when we try, right, like in the last cycle, I saw myself knowing this research, doing this research and seeing copy coming back to me and ads coming back to me. When I look at them now, I was like, damn, like that's still issue, not really value. Damn, right? There's some learning we need to do about how to do that better.
Awesome. I love this. Yes, very quickly, because we're going to have to go to a last question.
Okay. I just wanted to piggyback on what all three of them said. I think, we know that we have factions within the party that have to be dealt with. And I think having those tough conversations because at the end of the day, we have more in common than our differences, but we focus so much on our differences that we cannot find the common ground. And so once we get to that point, and I think at the core of that commonality is the fact that we're all humans. And when we can see each other as humans, then I think that will move us to a different place.
So well said. Thank you, Reverend. Thank you. I could talk to you guys all night long, but we can't. So we're going to end with a round robin, and then if there are questions as well. So I'm going to ask you to keep these answers brief. The round robin question, the last one of the evening, is this: in the spirit of learning and improvement, what will you do differently between now and 2022? Dr. Green.
Well, I wanted to thank you all for this opportunity as well. I think Reverend Paramount said it. The fundamental and most essential part of our victory in the state of Florida is going to be where we all come together. We need to be organized and united on one cause. This needs to be an inviting party. People need to be coming here because we welcome them and not be distracted. The purging of folks who are not coming to our party. We have people who want to come back who haven't voted. We need to make the Democratic Party home, a welcoming place for folks who want to come here to support us. My responsibility going forward is going to make sure that the messaging, as Reverend Dr. Paramore said, Democratic Party is not an anti-faith believing party. We are culturally sensitive, we are spiritual. Even those who choose not to be religious have some belief. And I want to make sure going forward that this might not be any other belt but the Bible Belt. This is a southern state with southern tendencies. People are here who have fled to this country. It is the third border of this country. It is the border of the belt. The new Build Back Better initiative has the Partnership for Prosperity to Central and South America. And here is this great state of Florida. And so my role and my responsibility and my passion is going to do my best to make sure that every voice is heard, as Stacy says. Every issue and Democrat who wants to be a part of us is invited and included. And that will be my support going forward to make sure that our party is not just seen as a losing state, but as a recovering state. One that has all the Democrats here, all of us on this call tonight. I'm not going to be preaching tonight, but I'm saying to you that we have an opportunity to not just save Florida, but to help Joe Biden by selecting the next senator to make the House more workable, to make sure that he not only has the support in Congress, but in Senate, and that we have we get rid of a Republican governor, select the right candidate. So my purpose right now is going to make sure that 2020 is victorious. And that when we have this discussion next time, we will be talking about the victories we had in the state of Florida and not the losses.
From your mouth to God's ears. Angela, what would you do? What will you be doing differently between now and 2022?
So I'm going to be working with progressive grassroots organizations to build coalitions and work to reach Hispanic communities, register voters, create engagement programs, using different targeting messaging to really effectively reach the Cuban and Venezuelan communities differently than the other Hispanic communities. I also want to focus on two things, and it has to do with messaging. I think we need to negate the false messaging that the Republicans create, and that was a huge issue in Miami. Especially, playing like really distracting, violent videos and saying like defund the police, for example, or, just other videos like saying that, talking about socialism, right? And saying how dangerous Biden is and how dangerous it would be to get him elected. So with that being said, I think we didn't have a strong enough negation of those fake as they call it, fake news, right? They literally were fake messaging. And I think that we need to be stronger in negating that and saying, no, that is not what the Democratic Party stands for. That is not what we want. And that is not what we're going to do. And then number two, create effective messaging to reach voters, just like the Republicans have been doing. They're literally taking our message and twisting it in a way that's favorable to them. Well, we need to do the same. We need to get our claws out and literally start like fighting back and letting the community know what it is that we actually stand for so that people can be clear about it.
Awesome. I'm glad you're on our side. Alfonso, what will you be doing differently between now and 2022?
So I've made the decision. I think I have to fundamentally lead in a completely different way. Historically, I have done all of my work on the IE side and on the grassroots side, and in part my engagement with the party and becoming the vice chair is about trying to be unified in a way. It's important for me as a man, it's important for me as a Black man to stand in solidarity with all communities that are affected, and to also figure out how to walk the talk of not just saying we have to stand together to build a stronger party that is actually reflective of who we are as Democrats, but I have to show up and do that and not just talk about it. And so everything else that comes along with that, that's what I'm doing.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. I love it. It's and by the way, Alfonso, I hear you. I have the same. I'm grappling with. I need to do things differently, and I think for all of the panelists here, we've really grown in these quote unquote failures and gone in different directions that I think will ultimately lead to the success that we're looking for. Stacey, what will you be doing differently between now and 2022?
For the last 4 years, I've been incredibly focused on Brevard because I was the chair here. And I think I'll be doing a lot more coalition building and trying to both share and learn from best practices from organizers across the state. I think the other thing that I will continue to engage in is good trouble. I think that too often people engage in systems in ways that allow for power to be dispensed from the top. And so we just go along to get along. Like, let's just be real. That's how systems operate. And I think that fundamentally that's why we're failing, is because we don't speak up when things are not working effectively, because we don't engage to fix them, because we don't try to find solutions. I truly feel that we've got to cause good trouble. And when we see things that are not working, we cannot sit by and let them continue to happen. So that's what I'll be doing, building coalition and causing trouble.
Love it. Good trouble. Sign me up. Sign me up. Reverend, what will you be doing differently between now and 2022?
Stirring up good trouble, as always, what I'm known for. But I think, we have got to start forcing the hard conversations that we tend to shy away from. And so that will be part of what I'll be looking to do and working with, expanding our faith engagement across the state. But again, to the heart of all of this, there are conversations that we have shied away from for decades, that if we are truly going to be the Florida Democratic Party, and we are truly going to flip this state, then we have to have some very tough conversations. And I'm going to be a part of leading some of those conversations. And some of those have already started. Because that's going to be the core of what we become, is facing those challenges and having those kind of conversations.
So we'll be doing some soul searching with you, Reverend. I love it. Representative Shah, what will you be doing differently between now and 2022?
Right, it's one of those questions the employer asks, and What is your room for improvement? I'll tell you, I'm going to be trying to spend more time focusing on what motivates voters that maybe don't think like those of us on this call. And I've often thought that it's hard for us to understand other motivations. We believe what we believe it very strongly. And, and sometimes I think we don't understand that there's other motivations for other folks. And I'm interested in spending some time maybe thinking a little different than I normally do, just so we can maybe pry some of that away, particularly in a state like Florida, where I'm starting to think that taxes are the number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 motivating issue to voters. And that's unfortunate, but so I'm just starting to try to think about some things like that, which is a little different than maybe I'm used to doing. So that's my room for improvement.
Love it. Love it very much. So last but not least, very briefly, Roxy, what will you be doing differently between now and 2022?
Between now and 2022, two things. First is that I want to make sure that all the eligible Black voters in Florida are registered to vote. I want to live in that space. I want to own that space with all my wonderful people who do that work. And then second thing is I want to anchor in and support and develop the leadership of women of color, but particularly Black women, and then centering that in the work that we do.
I love it. Sign me up. Wow. So we've come to the end of our panel. I want to thank each and every one of you for sharing with us tonight, for being a part of this. I feel especially honored to have been able to have this conversation with you all. I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone at home who's on the ground doing this work every single day. We love you. We see you. We appreciate you. One of the things I think we've all learned tonight, that democracy just doesn't happen every 4 years or every 2 years in November. It's work that has to happen consistently day in and day out, or democracy won't survive. So I hope that we're going to see all of you in the coming months, in the coming years, as we do this work and allow America and Florida to grow into its potential, to be the powerhouse we know it is as a democracy. So I'm going to turn this back over to, thank you, everyone.
Millie, thank you for leading this insightful discussion panel. This was like amazing. Please join us Thursday, April 1st next week for the third and final installment of Pushing for Progress, the panel series. Is Texas the next Georgia? And we have to make that answer yes. Register at wearemarchon.org/PFP, and we'll see you there. And in the meantime, sign the pledge to register voters at wearemarchon.org/pledge. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.